So, Nick, we had the second installment last night, Whittaker versus Adesanya. A much closer fight this time around, but I got to admit, I'm a bit surprised at some of the stuff I've been reading on the online forums today. A lot of people think Robert Whittaker was robbed here and that he actually won this fight. I'm having a hard time getting there. Are you?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult fight to judge because there were great minutes for both fighters in every single round, except for the first one. I think the first round was pretty soundly Izzy. But I do think every single round, with the exception of one, maybe two, was in favor of Izzy. I think the takedowns helped Robert in a couple of those rounds, and he wasn't able to do much, but he did get to the back at one point, and he was on the back standing. That was some good stuff out of Robert Whittaker. We saw a great Robert Whittaker, and just like I predicted, this was going to be a much more difficult fight, a much closer fight than the first time these guys fought, and this thing had decision written all over it.
Yeah.
After the first round, I was like, I don't know if Izzy might catch him and put him to sleep even quicker than he did the first time. But after Robert came out in the second round and looked like he was starting to finally find his footing and put his shots together, I was like, okay, maybe it will go decision. And every round that I started to watch and felt like Izzy was winning, the commentators would be like, I don't know, it was a great round for Robert. But then the stats are coming up, and Izzy is ahead. Even though they're called all close rounds, he is ahead on the scores. And I know the judges don't look at the numbers by the strikes and everything like that. But optics usually tell you a lot, and the body language tells you a lot. In this fight in particular, octagon control and body language really did play a major factor because there wasn't a ton of activity that was like, substantial, I should say. There were a lot of great moments for both fighters, but nothing really that had the crowd roaring at any particular moment that would sway the judges. So I think it was rinse and repeat, 49-46. That's how I had it, all in favor for Izzy Adesanya. But Robert Whittaker did put on a hell of a performance.
Yeah, he did, and it's a performance he should be really proud of.
Yeah.
But I just think that it was a clear 4-1 for Izzy, maybe 3-2. I guess you could give Robert the second and the fifth.
Yeah.
But then you have the knockdown in the first round. And the reality is, in some of those exchanges, while they're not the most exciting things in the world, when one fighter is backing up another fighter, even if not a lot of strikes are being thrown, the fighter that's advancing is winning those minutes of the fight. And so I think Izzy, he's just such a beautiful, cerebral fighter. He might be the best we've ever seen as far as striking goes inside of the octagon. He just seems, he's gifted naturally. He absolutely has this uncanny ability to see shots, to read shots. He moves very well. He's built to be a striker. And then on top of that, you add the dedication and the great coach like Eugene, and the fact that he's in there getting better at his game, even though he's the champion and he's going through the division again, he's still getting motivated to get in the gym, work, improve, and make no mistake, he did make improvements. Robert Whittaker did get him down a couple of times last night, but Izzy Adesanya, like a true champ that he is, took that loss from Jan Blachowicz, went back and worked on his takedown defense. You saw one of the Hickman brothers here in Houston and some of the embeddeds working with him on getting up off the cage, getting up off the ground. Certainly made improvements there. A lot of people were displeased with Izzy's performance, and they thought that it wasn't a great, spectacular showing. To me, this was a beautiful technical performance by Izzy, and I get it. It wasn't a highlight reel knockout. It wasn't what Tai Tuivasa did to Derek just a few minutes prior. But make no mistake, this was a high-level MMA performance that Izzy put on.
Yeah, and if you don't actually pay attention to every little thing that Robert Whittaker's doing, you will find yourself waking up, facing the lights or, facing the ground. Izzy had to play it safe. He knows Robert's a dangerous fighter. He comes at you really well with those bursts, and usually he has more of a karate style that's a little bit more turned to the side, and he's a little bit more bladed. This time he came in more with the Western boxing style, and he was trying to cover ground with his feet, but at times it felt like he was reaching and getting really heavy in the front leg, and that's why Izzy was able to beat it up a little bit. He was starting to chop him down and slow Robert's entries down a lot. That's where I think really the tide started to shift in favor of Izzy, because once Robert didn't have fresh legs anymore, he was starting to show that or maybe starting to tell when he was going to go for those takedowns. And while some of them did work and they did look really good, they were textbook double legs and things like that. It was hard for him to keep Izzy on the ground. And then right after that, he's back in kickboxing range. And I don't think there's a fighter on the UFC's roster that can stand and do kickboxing with Izzy Adesanya. The way he moves, he sees everything coming. Robert's able to get his head all the way up to 6'4" Izzy's head, but Izzy's just pulling back just in the nick of time. I think it's masterful performances that we're going to see out of Izzy Adesanya from here on out, just like we've seen him before. But I don't mind a 25-minute, masterclass on striking. And I also don't mind a little bit of adversity. Watch him get taken down and get back up. Watch Robert have to deal with, the mental challenges of getting beat really bad in the first round, getting knocked down, and then coming back. That's what makes a great, rivalry. It's what makes fighters grow. It's what makes the rest of their career progress in a certain interesting, fascinating way. So that's why I really liked this fight, even though it wasn't quite as exciting maybe as the first one or some of the other fights on this card.
Yeah, I certainly found it exciting, and make no mistake about it, there is a good rivalry between Bobby Knuckles and Izzy Adesanya. I understand that it's 2-0 for Izzy, but the second fight was very close. The first fight he got caught, but there's a clear separation between them and the rest of the pack, and that kind of shifts the conversation to who's next. And I don't think you could give it to anybody besides Jared Cannonier after the performance that he put on against Derek Brunson last night. On paper, I think Izzy smokes Cannonier, but in reality, Jared Cannonier looked like one of the scariest guys on the planet last night. So who knows what's going to happen with that fight? But the thing I like about Izzy is the fact that he is a true champion. He said, I want the next in line. I hope it's some fresh blood. If it's not, if it's Brunson again and I got to clear him out again, I'll do it again. But luckily it's Cannonier, so he's next in line. And then that kind of brings us to the question of what happens with Bobby Knuckles now. It seems like Izzy's probably going to be holding onto that belt for at least a few more years unless Jared Cannonier can pull a pretty masterful upset. So once you lose twice to the champion, you're not getting that third shot unless something crazy happens. Robert Whittaker, to me, looked very undersized last night. He looked much smaller than Izzy. Our jiu-jitsu professor, Professor Draculino, actually went to the fighter hotel to visit one of his old friends that was cornering the guy that beat Blood Diamond. I'm drawing a blank on his name. But he said he saw Robert in the lobby, and he said he was much smaller than I thought he was. And he said, I've seen Adesanya in person too, and the size difference is pretty drastic. And I say all that to say this. Robert Whittaker did have some fights at 170, and I think maybe a fresh coat of paint would be what he needs here with the proper diet and strength and conditioning program to get him there safely. But I don't see what he really does at 185 except for hang out as the number one contender and just play the role of gatekeeper. And I don't know that he wants to do that.
Yeah, and I'm not willing to say he has no shot at ever fighting Izzy again, because last time we saw him lose to Izzy, he just went right back into the rankings and just started beating everybody, became undeniable. I think he can become undeniable again, and I do think that Izzy will be there for another 4 or 5 fights as the champ. So if he can get a few good wins against whoever else he needs to in the top 10 that he hasn't already fought, or maybe somebody who's on a hot streak that he beat earlier in his career, he could wind up back in there. 185, 170, and 145 are all very similar in the sense, and I'll add 125 men's as well. They're all similar in the sense that there's 2 people that are head and shoulders above everybody else, and it's the champion and the number one contender, and then the rest of the pack is just there, and maybe there's some new prospects that are on their way, and they're making their way down, like a Chimaev at 70 and potentially at 85, but they're on their way down. But as it stands right now today, Robert Whittaker and Izzy Adesanya are above everybody else in that division. Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman are above everybody else in that division. Max Holloway, Volkanovski, they're above everybody, and I don't think that we should just write off trilogies, even though they're 0-2 for some of these guys. Because if they're the right fit, if they're the next best guy in the world, and we know that, then we need to be putting them in there with the right competition. I think this fight going the distance really helped Robert get a potential third fight against Izzy Adesanya. Yeah. If he would have got finished again, there's no chance, and then he's just in no man's land, just hanging out, probably too small for 205, probably a little bit too big for 170, because he is just, there's no fat on Robert Whittaker. Yeah. So he's really going to have a tough time to make it. He'd probably have to pull off some muscle. Yeah. And then he might not be the fighter that he might not be as powerful, as explosive. Not to say there's not awesome fights at 170 for him, but I just don't know at this late in his career, at this stage in his career, he's willing to shave several pounds off of his physique and his natural body to go fight guys that are a little bit smaller and maybe it would bite him in the ass if he did that. It might be like a Cody No Love situation, like a TJ Dillashaw situation where you go down and you think it's going to be better for you and it ends up being worse. So Robert is in a tough spot, but he takes everything like a champ. The dude's already been to the top of the mountain. To be back at the, not the bottom, but in the middle of the mountain, looking to climb another one and try to get to the belt again is something really cool. Most people that have already been to the top don't have that in them. Robert Whittaker is and always will be a champion. He's got the champion mindset. I think he's going to go back in there probably sometime in June, maybe on the same card that Izzy fights on in June, and he's probably going to beat somebody up really bad. Later on in the year, he's going to beat somebody up again really bad, and who knows, maybe by this time next year, he'll have 2 or 3 more fights and become undeniable once again.
Yeah, and I tell you what, if the divisions went every 10 pounds like they do in the lighter weight classes, Robert Whittaker's your 175 world champion all day long. You got Usman at 165, Whittaker 175, Adesanya at 185. He just finds himself in a weird place between 2 weight classes where he's kind of like Kelvin Gastelum, except a much better fighter. He's kind of caught in between 170 and 185. He's a little big for one, little small for the other one, but nonetheless, he should be very proud of that performance. I am truly shocked about how many people think that he won that fight.
Me too.
That is a real testament to how well he did. I don't see it. I think you can make a case for 2 rounds, but I think Izzy won at least 3. But the Reaper certainly has nothing to hang his head on after a performance like that.
Yeah, Izzy's the champ for a reason. All week he's been at our gym and using it and trying to cut weight and train there, mopping up the floors. So any fighters out there, if you're wondering if you are too big to be mopping the floors after you get them all sweaty after class, just know that Izzy Adesanya was offering to wipe the mats down every single night after he used them at Main Street. So that shows you what a champion does. And anything else?
No, that's a true story, guys. Israel Adesanya is cleaning up the mats after himself. He's the champ of the world, and I got to think that's part of the reason that he is the champ. Anyways, guys, we really hope that you enjoyed this video. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought about the performance. Do you think Bobby Knuckles got robbed? And we will see you in the next one.
Peace.